In the spring of 2010, Rockstar Games released their take on what was considered a long-dead genre. A Western. After a complete oversaturation of the genre in the mid to late 20th century, with every possible cliche and stereotype being done to death, and seemingly every story that could take place in the American West being told, Rockstar did what they do best. They destroyed expectations, making one of the best narrative open world games to this day. Red Dead Redemption tells the story of John Marston, a former outlaw who'd been captured by the government and sent to eliminate the remnants of his old gang, in order to wipe out any incivility from the new world. And whilst the game is absolutely brilliant, from the engaging and unique narrative, the gorgeous and immersive open world, and the iconic Woody Jackson score, to me and many others, it always felt like there was something missing from the game. A large chunk of John's story left never truly explained, a part of this game that was yet untold. The game, for whatever reason, always felt like a sequel of sorts. Little did we know, that's exactly what it was. Back in around 2016-2017, the love I once had for games as a kid was slowly dissipating, something that I thought was just a symptom of growing up, and I don't think I'm alone in that regard. But looking retrospectively, I realise now that the reason for mine and so many others my age beginning to disconnect from video games was far more thanks to the direction of the industry. As we saw more and more soulless corporate games be released each year, as we saw microtransactions take precedent over quality, as we saw publishers neglect story and single player in favour of convoluted live services and battle royales, we often felt that games simply weren't being made for us anymore. So when I was scrolling through YouTube in October of 2016, I didn't exactly expect this dying love to suddenly be revived. But that's exactly what happened when I saw a new upload from Rockstar. After being announced in 2016, Red Dead Redemption 2 kind of sat at the forefront of the games industry for a whole 2 years. The hype was unmatched, the entire gaming community sat in wait for this unexpected prequel, and although various decent games came out around this time, everyone's eyes were solely fixed on Rockstar. How would they top the flawless original story of redemption and sacrifice? Would we be playing as John Marston? Would it be a sequel, a prequel, a completely separate story? Well, 2 years later, after countless delays and an occasional horror story of Rockstar employees working 100-hour weeks, all of our questions would be answered, and with these sort of unreachable expectations, it wouldn't have been surprising in the slightest if Red Dead 2 had been a giant letdown on the scale of Cyberpunk. But somehow, against all odds, these massive expectations were blown out of the water. It goes without saying that this video will have full spoilers for both Red Dead Redemption games, so with that being said, let's get into why I consider Red Dead Redemption 2 to be the greatest game. I can't quite put into words the feeling I had when I opened up Red Dead 2 for the first time, as that Rockstar logo appeared with the booming sound of a shotgun bringing your focus entirely on the screen. And after waiting for, you know, the excessive Rockstar loading screens, you were finally brought into this Wild West world once again, thrown into the icy blizzards of the Grizzly Mountains, confused but ready to see what this prequel would bring. We begin with easily the most scrutinised aspect of Red Dead 2, the gameplay. And since we're starting here, we might as well jump into the deep end. The mission structure of this game has been criticised to no avail, with people claiming it's outdated, claiming it's formulaic, claiming it's boring. And whilst I understand that the formula of ride somewhere, shoot some people, ride back isn't for everyone, I definitely believe that as the biggest flaw with this game, this issue's been simplified and overblown. Yes, there are plenty of missions that follow that classic Rockstar formula, and if you're not a fan of that, then it's understandable that it may get tedious. However, to disregard the countless unique and engaging missions is completely disingenuous in my opinion. Not only are there plenty of missions that are so much more than that formula, such as the hot air balloon in Chapter 6, the countless stealth missions littered throughout the game, and the bar brawl that begins Chapter 2, but even when the game indulges in this template, the missions that revolve around it always have an added element of atmosphere that makes them uniquely fun. Saving Sean from Blackwater, attacking the Braithwaite's house, the Saint Denis heist, everything in Guarma. These missions are made great not by the structure itself, but by the context around them, further encouraging the player to stay engaged in the incredible narrative, which we'll get to later. The second most criticised aspect of Red Dead 2's gameplay would probably be the gunplay, a mechanic that's been at the forefront of nearly all of Rockstar's games for the last 20 years, and a mechanic that seems to be polarising in the community who plays their games. To me, once again, the issues with the gunplay seem overblown, and are usually exacerbated by players who are overly reliant on the Deadeye mechanic. Now, you could make the argument that Deadeye, especially in the later stages of the game, eliminates near all difficulty from the gunplay, and that's a fair argument, but that doesn't make the functional base gameplay foundation itself bad. The system's more than functional and plenty satisfying most of the time, and if you're playing to be specifically challenged by the gunplay, then I hate to be this guy, but this game just isn't for you. The system's not revolutionary by any means, but it certainly creates one of the more immersive gunplay experiences you can have, with gun care playing an essential role in how your guns feel and fire. Speaking of Rockstar's criticised systems from the past, the hand-to-hand combat of Red Dead 2 is easily the place where it makes the most improvements upon its predecessor, replacing a near unplayably clunky fighting mechanic with one that, despite its relative simplicity, feels grounded, weighty, and genuinely fun. Every hit feels like it connects, every grapple feels like a genuine struggle, and there's no better feeling than hitting a brutal counterpunch that knocks your opponent out. Now, whilst these mechanics are, in literal terms, what makes up the gameplay of Red Dead 2, there's a feature this game brings, a feature which is harder to quantify, but a feature that is abundant throughout the game. Immersion. Never before or after has a game reached the level of pure immersion that Red Dead 2 did, with plenty of revolutionary mechanics that will no doubt change the industry in years to come. From basic things like dynamic hair growth and the eating mechanic, to the obscene amount of animations finely crafted for each individual action, to the tiniest of details in the way NPCs and animals act and react to the world around them. And that brings us perfectly on to the thing Rockstar games are known for truly perfecting. Being one of the biggest game worlds ever made, it would have been very easy for Rockstar to fall into the recent trend of creating bloated, unimmersive checklist maps that span a massive area but contain no depth. For too long, so many AAA open world games have run into the same problems. Their worlds become collectathons, focused more on the player gaining experience points as opposed to having experiences. But as we know, Rockstar doesn't follow trends, they create them. So instead of building a shallow, vapid world, they decided to craft the most immersive, living, breathing world that we have ever seen. This map, made up of New Austin, West Elizabeth, Lemoyne, New Hanover, and Amberino, doesn't simply exist for the sake of the player. No, this world is its own living place that the player just so happens to be a part of. People live, things happen, buildings are built and knocked down, bounty hunters collect prizes, trains keep on rolling, regardless of whether the player sees them or not. And this commitment to putting the world before the player makes it feel truly alive, more so than any checklist of auto-generated side quests ever could. To be clear though, that's not at all me saying that the world lacks content, it's simply the presentation of this content that makes it feel circumstantial. Of course, the game brings back its Strangers and Freaks missions from the original game, and there's plenty of great mini-stories within those, like the saga of Jim Boy Calloway and the tragedy of Marko Dragic. But on top of that set content, there's an inconceivable amount of world events and interactions you can find completely of your own accord, each with their own detailed stories and unique experiences. Being kidnapped by the couple at the Aberdeen pig farm, finding the strange man's lair, stumbling across a vampire in Saint Denis, that's just a few of the bigger world interactions, not to mention the minor one-offs, like murdering the KKK in the woods of Lemoyne or saving a man from a bear trap for him to buy you a gun later on in return. These world encounters perfectly find a way to create meaningful content whilst feeling like unique random experiences specific to the player. I could rant about this insane volume of content for hours, and if you want to see more in-depth look at these encounters, I'd recommend checking out Ethan aka Fishy's video series covering them. The reason I say that is because if I covered them all here, this video would easily be 3 hours long, and I can't do that again. Plus, that wouldn't even be mentioning the various camp activities you can do with the gang, the general gang interactions and storylines, the spontaneous attacks from other outlaws around the country, the NPCs' life cycles that feel truly reactive to the world, the business backroom robberies, the bounty hunts, the legendary animal hunts, the plant collecting, the crafting, the dynamic weather, the abandoned locations, the detailed notes, the cigarette cards, the newspapers, poker, blackjack, five-finger fillet. There is so much fucking stuff in this world, and all of it somehow... ran out of breath. There is so much fucking stuff in this world, and all of it somehow feels entirely ingrained into the world, making you feel as if you're living in this nation of outlaws as opposed to just playing a game in it. Oh, and also, horse balls contract in cold weather. That's kind of the best feature in the game, to be honest. You can't really top that. Putting all of that aside though, putting aside the groundbreaking world, the innovative gameplay systems, the dynamic horseballs and everything in between, there's only one thing that we really need to look at to see why this game is considered by so many the greatest of all time. And that of course is its name. Going into Red Dead 2, a lot of people had their doubts about the game's story, namely because the original was so much to live up to, and with the introduction of a whole new protagonist, there was even more pressure to ensure this game connected seamlessly with the original story of John, while still being interesting in its own right. And my god, did they get it perfect. Somehow, despite its 60-hour runtime, the story of this game maintains a consistent level of brilliance throughout, and that begins with its protagonist, Arthur Morgan. Red Dead 2's entire plot is centered around deterioration, around things falling from a once majestic point. At the core of this deterioration are the ideals of the Old West, slowly being replaced with the highbrow, enlightened thinking of civilization. But it can be seen in so many other places throughout the game, within the relationships of the gang, within Dutch, but most clearly within Arthur, who goes from the powerful right-hand man of one of the most notorious gangs in the country to a dying, sickly man, unable to prevent the gang's eventual implosion. However, this physical deterioration of Arthur, similarly to the destruction of the ideals of the Old West, is shown to be vital in making way for better things to come. At the start of the game, Arthur is cold, ruthless, not entirely unfeeling, but not exactly brimming with empathy. He's loyal to a T, and with that, can't see past the confines of the gang. But as the game goes on, as he sees Dutch's moral compass become more and more skewed, as he becomes doubtful of his leader and the ideals he claims to live by, and of course, as he finds out he's sick in Chapter 6, Arthur grows into a man willing to do anything for those he cares about, and those he doesn't, dedicating the last few months of his life to try to make up for some of the pain and suffering he's caused throughout it, whether it be with Edith Downs, Rain's Fall, or John. A protagonist, though, can only be as great as the force he's opposing, and in Red Dead 2, we get easily the best antagonist Rockstar's ever created. Not the Pinkertons or the O'Driscolls, not Leviticus Cornwall, not even Micah. No, I'm talking about Arthur's oldest friend, his brother in arms, the man he follows unquestionably for so long, Dutch van der Linde. Dutch has an arc that somewhat mirrors Arthur, a fall from grace that begins from before the game even starts, on that boat in Blackwater. Although we don't see exactly what went on in the failed heist, it's clear that Dutch let his true colours shine, let his selfishness and his malevolence shine through, which is why as the game's story goes on, as more and more of Dutch's plans fail or fall short, as the gang continually loses faith in their messiah, his transition from warm and caring leader to cold, self-centered tyrant isn't entirely surprising. There's been a debate ever since Red Dead 2 came out, hell, even within the game's dialogue itself, as to whether Dutch changed as a man or simply let his true colours show, and it's pretty clear that both Arthur and John believe the latter. And this is what makes Dutch such an interesting and layered villain. He's a man who clearly at some point lived by a set of solid principles, who truly believed in what he stood for, who truly cared for the people he called family. But it seems the entire time there was an underlying vitriol, there was manipulation behind his words and his sermons, there was a god complex lurking underneath. Despite a genuine care for the people around him, unlike Arthur, Dutch's self-preservation is his #1 priority, which is the reason he attempts to use people like the Greys, Braithwaites and the natives for his own gain, and the reason that time and time again he leaves his so-called brothers to die, if they're going to hold him back from surviving in the world he's created. That's the reason that despite trusting Arthur, he refuses to accept Micah as the traitor, given the fact that Micah's healthy, strong and able. It'd be far more to Dutch's advantage to have him as his right-hand man, as opposed to the sick and dying Arthur. And that, coupled with a refusal to accept he was wrong, pushes him to give up on his two oldest friends in order to save himself. But again, in spite of this cowardice and selfish malevolence on Dutch's part, there is still clear good in him, shown in the grand finale of the epilogue, where he gets his own mini redemption arc years after he gave up on everything he claimed to believe in. Not only does this provide an incredible conclusion to Dutch's story, but it also links in beautifully with Red Dead 1, finally giving an explanation as to why John wouldn't shoot Dutch in the finale of that game. And that's just the first of countless beautiful parallels to the original that Red Dead 2 holds, from Dutch's speeches about nature to the fishing mission with Jack that parallels the end of the epilogue of the original game, to tiny things like the fact that John can't swim. The sheer amount of care and detail that was put into this game to make it not only fantastic in its own right, but also perfect as a prequel, with all the little questions and mysteries from the first game being paid off in brilliant ways, is magnificent. Speaking of the original, that brings us to the second protagonist of Red Dead 2, and the man that this series truly revolves around: John Marston. In the early stages of the prequel, we're left without much John-related content, with Rockstar holding back from relying too much on fan service early on so that we'd fully connect with Arthur and the rest of the gang. But as the game goes on, as John and Arthur's relationship continues to grow, we see just how the story of this game feeds directly into John's journey of the original. John and Arthur at the start of Red Dead 2 don't particularly like each other, and honestly, they don't like each other all too much by the end either. But what is built between them over the course of the game is a massive amount of mutual respect, with the two seeing themselves as almost a reflection of one another. Arthur sees John as a younger version of himself, with the wife and child that he himself lost, with the opportunity to break out of this life of endless running before it's too late, before John ends up with nothing to show for his life except the gang like Arthur is. And that's why in the final moments of his life, Arthur gives his everything to ensure a better future for John, to ensure he's able to live the life that Arthur wished he could have.
I think I've pushed all I can.
Come on.
You go.
We ain't got time for this. Not now.
We ain't both gonna make it. Go. Now. I'll hold them off. It would mean a lot to me. Please. There ain't no more time for talk. Go.
Arthur.
Go to your family.
Arthur!
Get the hell out of here and be a goddamn man.
You're my brother.
However, as we reach the epilogue, we realise that this final act of selfless kindness from Arthur ended up being the exact reason for John's eventual death down the road. By the end of the epilogue, John has everything he could ask for. His ranch built, his family with him, his life finally seeming at peace. But when Sadie comes saying she's found Micah, John doesn't feel like he has any other choice but to get revenge, after Micah took away his brother like he did. This revenge, the revenge that Arthur himself time and time again spoke out against, ends up being the reason Edgar Ross finds John, and the reason for his inevitable death in the original game. The story of Red Dead Redemption is a truly tragic one, and it's made even more tragic by the path of revenge Jack also takes, a path that leads him to become a merciless killer, completely alone in the world, the exact thing John didn't want him to become. Despite John and Arthur's best efforts, they couldn't end this cycle of violence and revenge. They weren't able to prevent their successors from becoming the same ruthless outlaw killers that they were. Arthur, Dutch, John. Those three characters are what make Red Dead Redemption's story what it is. Of course, there's so many other details to the narrative I could talk about. The fantastic characterization of the rest of the gang, the brilliant feuds with the O'Driscolls, the Pinkertons, Leviticus Cornwall, and the military, the debt collecting missions, the bank heists, the Grey Braithwaite battle in Rhodes, Angelo Bronte kidnapping Jack, Charles and Sadie as perfect side characters with incredible arcs of their own, the entire epilogue. There is so much to this game's story. However, when it comes down to it, the story of Red Dead Redemption is the tragic tale of Dutch Vanderland, Arthur Morgan, and John Marston. Whilst all three men are able to redeem themselves for their failures and their evils, all three still fall victim to the consequences of them. All three are unable to prevent the unstoppable tide of civilization. But although all of them end their journeys dead and buried, they all end them with their values and their principles strongly held, and they all die at peace with their fate. Red Dead Redemption 2, to me, embodies everything that makes games great, but namely, it's the game's innovation, immersion, its sheer size and depth, coupled with a narrative that I believe is the peak of the entire medium, that makes it truly outstanding. Whether or not the game's at the top of your list or not, it's hard to deny the significance of Red Dead 2, pushing the boundaries of the industry in a time when so many publishers are more content with copying the work of others. Now don't get me wrong, this game is by no means entirely flawless, but regardless of what flaws it does have, in my eyes, it will always be perfect. Not only for what it is, but for the fact that it revived my love for games as a medium. Because if it weren't for Red Dead Redemption 2 doing what it did, this channel would not exist today. thank you so much for watching the video. If you did enjoy, it would really be appreciated and really help me out if you could hit like. And if you're new here and want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe, post notifications turned on so you don't miss another video. Some of you might realize that this is kind of a remake of an old video I did. I just figured it was about time I updated it, and also I replayed Red Dead 2 over the summer and just needed to talk about it. If you want to support the channel, my Patreon link is in the description below, and if you want to keep updated on videos and streams and things like that, Twitter and Instagram links in the description as well. And with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching. I've been Joe, aka Scarab, and I will see you in the next one.